Coffee with Moshe. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu shekoni b'dvaro.
Amen.
Today is June 14th, 2020. And today I want to share a little bit of a lesson that on the Sabbath we read in the synagogue from a book called Menorath HaMa'or, which means the lighting of the candles, or the light of the candle. And it was written by, it's a collection of Talmudic passages written by Rabbi Yitzchak Abuhov, who lived around the 1300 in Spain. Spain had a very big Jewish community there until the rise of the Inquisition, which ended the Jewish tradition there. And my own family lived there at the time as well. So he quotes some things here from the Talmud, the tractate of Bava Metzia, which I want to share with you today, because I think this has universal lessons. So before I get to the main section, I just want to go over some sections that I highlighted some years ago. And it talks about King David. Now we know that the Bible is filled with imperfect characters. They're imperfect because if they were perfect, we would not be able to learn from them. The fact that they're not perfect, we learn from their mistakes and how they overcame them. David had the issue with Bathsheba, who we won't go into all the details, but an embarrassing incident in which he failed with a woman because he was aroused by her and so forth, and he repented later on. So they talk here about a passage where somebody was studying with King David, and he says, "Okay, David, what is the law about a man who has relations with another man's wife? Is it death by strangulation, or etc., etc., and does he have a place in the world to come, etc.?" So David answers, such a person is condemned to death, but he does have a share in the world to come, in the afterlife. However, one who humiliates his fellow man in public has no share in the world to come. In other words, as bad as what David did was, it's worse to publicly humiliate somebody. And here we're learning from the Talmud how careful we have to be with another person's honor. And whatever needs to be done should be done in the proper way, and we don't humiliate somebody in public, which is, of course, a common thing these days all over the world. Mocking political leaders on Facebook and so forth. We don't mock people. It's considered a major transgression in Judaism. And they give the following story, and they say, it is better that a man should throw himself into a burning furnace and not humiliate another man in public. And it goes on to the explanations, which I'm not going to go in now. It's a biblical lesson. And I heard a story that took place in Europe where the rabbi came very early and he decided to heat up the furnace. And usually who comes first? The simpleton, the caretaker, the janitor. And he put his head inside the oven and his rear end was sticking out to light up the oven in those days, very old-fashioned oven. And one of the students came in and thought that was funny. Kicked the guy in the butt just to make fun of him. Just a little joke. But it was the rabbi. And he kept his face in there so long until the person passed over and his beard became burnt. And when someone found out that this is what happened, he said, "Why'd you do that? Why'd you stay in the furnace?" He says, "Lucky am I that I was able to fulfill this commandment of it's better to burn yourself than to humiliate somebody. If I would have come out and the man would have said, 'Oh my God, I kicked the rabbi in the butt,' while he was lighting the furnace, the man would have been humiliated for life. So I stayed there and I burnt my beard. That's better than publicly humiliating and shaming another person." And that's what we learn from there. Talmud continues with other passages that are very interesting. And it also says, quoting from verses from various places of the Bible, and it says here, It quotes from various places that it says, even when the gates of prayer are closed, the gates of tears are not closed, which is the idea that Even if you don't have the right prayer perhaps in your hand, you don't have the right prayer book, but the tears are the most powerful prayer. I won't elaborate on that at the moment. And then it says another thing. Le'olam amar Rav Yehuda, le'olam yehi adam zahir b'tvuah b'toch beito. Let a man, Rabbi Yehuda said, let a man always be careful with financial matters inside his house. She'ein meriva mitzuya b'toch beito shel adam ela iskei tvuah. Conflict is not found in a man's home other than on matters of produce, meaning money. Meaning, when there's financial troubles, there's marital troubles. And the person should always be careful with his finances to keep what we call shalom bayit, peace in the household. And now, another passage. Rabbi Chalbo said, by the way, this is all happening about 1,700, 1,800 years ago, these discussions. Le'olam yehi adam zahir b'chvod ishto. A person should always be careful with the honor of his wife. A person should always be careful with the dignity and the respect that he accords his wife. Any blessing that is found in the home of a man is only there because of his wife. And again, it quotes various biblical passages. And the message here, again, we're going back 1,800 years approximately, and it's saying how to treat your wife. That any blessing you have in your home is due to your wife. And this is a religious concept, not a social, modern concept of any sort. And now we get to the topic of arguments, dispute, which is a terrible thing. Now again, we're going back close to 2,000 years and we see a plague, an epidemic, and it's called argument. It's called people not being able to get along with each other. It's called ending friendships and relationships over disputes that could have been settled peacefully. It's called judging people. This is a sickness. It's an illness that we have to work on every day of our lives to overcome the urge to argue, to prove that you're right. And there's many examples of this in the Talmud, but this here on Bava Metzia, page Nun Tet Amud Bet, which is 59b, tells the following story. An argument took place between the majority of the rabbis and a Rabbi Eliezer. It was called Tanur Shel Achnai, the oven of Achnai. And they say Achnai is a snake. And the oven was built in a way that it looked like a snake. I don't know exactly what it looked like. It doesn't matter for our purposes. And in ancient Judaism, the idea of purity or lack of purity, uncleanliness, spiritual uncleanliness, was a very, very major matter. It's been lost over the years, unfortunately, but the idea of spiritual cleanliness was a key to Jewish life. In fact, it was the key, ritual purity. When we look today at this coronavirus thing, and people are saying surface carries the disease, clothing carries the disease, it does, it doesn't, gloves are good, masks are bad, we don't know. How is it transmitted? All of this is discussed 2,000 years ago in the Talmud and 3,300 years ago in the Bible, in the books of Moses. Those issues, which objects transmit purity and which do not, transmit impurities and which don't. If I touched a dead person and I touched you, does it transmit it? If I touched the dead person and I touched a mug and then you touched it, does it transmit it? To people that look back, it looks like stupidity and nonsense. And yet today we're all discussing it. What transmits impurity? How is the disease transferred? Is it airborne? Is it not airborne? These are the very discussions that the rabbis were having 2,000 years ago and going back to the days of Moses. So here they're discussing this thing called the oven of Achnai, the oven which is shaped like a snake. And I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to try to explain it, whether it's pure or impure in a certain circumstance. And they argue, the rabbis. They argue. That's what the Talmud is. 500 years of arguments. And they argue back and forth. And Rabbi Eliezer said one thing, and the majority of the rabbis said another thing. And it says, Ba'oto hayom, and that day, Heshiv Rabbi Eliezer kol tshuvot sheba'olam. And that day, Rabbi Eliezer answered them every single question in the world. V'lo kiblu himenu. They didn't accept his answers. And he says, I'm right. And they said, we're right. Now the following story, whether it happened in reality, we don't know. Rabbi Yitzchak Abu Hav and others say maybe it was a dream, maybe it was a metaphor, we don't know, but it's a story. He said to them, if the law is like me, let this carob tree prove me right. The carob tree uprooted itself and went 100 cubit feet. And they said, some say it was 400, they say, a carob tree doesn't prove the law. Okay. He said, if the law is like me, let this body of water prove me right. And the water went in reverse. And as the water was going in one direction, it changed directions. And they said again, we don't prove laws from the direction of water. And he went and he said, if the law is like me, let the walls of this house of study come crumbling down. And they came halfway, and then they stopped. Rabbi Yeshua said, if scholars are debating each other in the law, we should have everything be destroyed. We shouldn't have it destroyed, so it stopped. Out of the honor of Rabbi Yeshua, it stopped halfway, and they never straightened out. The wall remained crooked. It didn't go all the way down because of the honor of Rabbi Yeshua, and it didn't go back up because of the honor of Rabbi Eliezer. So it remained halfway to give honor to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion and to Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. Until today, these walls of this synagogue are bent. And then he said, if the law is like me, let the heavens themselves proclaim the truth. And a heavenly voice came out and said to the other rabbis, how you argue against Rabbi Eliezer, that the law is like him in every place. Rabbi Eliezer, my son, is correct. Rabbi Yeshua stood up on his legs and said, the Bible says the law is not in heaven. The law has been given to us on Mount Sinai, and now it is in the realm and the dominion of the rabbis, the judges, the lawyers, to decide the law. You gave us the law, now it belongs to us. And we don't decide laws by a heavenly voice, but by studying the scriptures. And it says in the Bible, follow the majority. And then they say, Ashkehayu Rabbi Nathan Eliyahu. Okay, so we're saying, Ashkehayu Rabbi Nathan Eliyahu. Rabbi Nathan found Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet. And he said, Amrle, Maika Avi Kadosh Baruch Hu Bahisha Ata. What was God doing when the rabbis were having this debate? Amrle Kahayich. He was smiling. God was smiling. V'amar nitzchuni banai nitzchuni. My sons have beaten me, my sons have beaten me. Meaning, even though God himself gave the law and said the law is like one party, Rabbi Eliezer, the other rabbi said, no, God, you gave us the law to decide based on the majority. We have decided. You're wrong, we're right. And God said, my sons are correct. God's admitting that his sons were correct. Anyway, they go on to say that day they decided against Rabbi Eliezer, even though God himself sided with him. The majority won, and anything that Rabbi Eliezer purified, and they said was not pure, they destroyed. He said the stove was pure, they destroyed it, and so forth. And they decided that therefore they're putting him in excommunication. And the story goes on that Rabbi Akiva, who was the great rabbi of the time, he put on black clothing and he said, let me go tell the news. Let me go break the news to Rabbi Eliezer that we're excommunicating him in a sense. We're social distancing him. He says, because if I don't go, maybe somebody who's unworthy will go, and this will cause tragedy. Because when you break this kind of news to a great man, bad things will happen. He says, let me do it. In other words, the way you tell somebody is very important. It has to be the right kind of person. So we'll cut to the end. He says, why are you wearing black clothing today? And he says, well, today your friends have pushed you aside. He tore his clothing in mourning. He took off his shoes. He sat on the ground like in a sign of mourning, and tears began to come down his eyes. They say that day, a third of the world's produce, dates, wheat, barley, were destroyed, meaning great tragedy came to the world because of the sadness that Rabbi Eliezer was feeling. And they even say wherever he turned his eyes, he was so holy and so pure that things burnt. And they say even water in the ocean would stand still. And people said, Why is this happening? If something so bad happened to the world, it must have been because of Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Hyrcanus. And one of the rabbis got up and he said, Master of the universe, it is known before you that we did not make these decisions against Rabbi Eliezer for my honor. Shelo lechvodi asiti, I didn't do this for my personal honor. Velo lechvod beit abba asiti, and I didn't do this to honor my family, my father's household. Ela lechvodcha, for your honor, God. Shelo yerbu machlokot b'Yisrael, that there should not be disagreement in Israel. Nach hayam miza'afo, and the ocean that was turbulent became calm. In other words, again, one of the rabbis interceded and God heard his point of view and understood it. Because the rabbi was saying, we went by the majority. I didn't do this because I wanted to win. I didn't do this for my own honor. I didn't do it for the honor of my family. I did it so we shouldn't have a division, a split among the Jewish people, which has happened over the years. We want unity. Now, the important concepts here are, on one hand, we do pursue truth. On the other hand, within that truth, we have to find consensus and unity and compromise as much as possible, and not to have a split between a group. This passage, when Rabbi Yitzchak Abuhav of Spain, 13th century, brought it down as a lesson, the lesson was unity. Even if it means swallowing your pride, even if it means looking the other way, even if it means you taking a lesser position and letting somebody else take a greater position, all this is worthwhile. Be humble. Let somebody else take the credit for the sake of unity, for the sake of not having disputes.